Brother David was just talking about the significance of type versus antitype and living in the reality of the life of Jesus Christ. And he touched a little bit on consequences versus sin, and I'm going to talk a little bit about consequences today. While we're waiting for everyone to get settled, if you want, you can turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 11. This is one of my favorite chapters. The last few years, I've been going around talking with many of my Adventist associates and friends, and I've been telling them to read Deuteronomy 11. I specifically tell them to read Deuteronomy 11 verses 13 through 17. We'll go ahead and read those while we get started. Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 17, it says, "And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto the commandments which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, to serve Him with all your heart, with all your soul, that I will give you the rain in your land in due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn, thy wine, and thy oil. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and He shut up heaven, and there be no rain, that the land yield not her fruit, lest ye perish quickly from the good land which the Lord giveth you." And then I turn to my Adventist friends and I say, why is it not raining? Why is it not raining? How can you look at this? How can we have gone for so long and wonder why we have been dry and barren? Right? And I don't care whether it's your God is the false God of the Trinity or your God is the God of this world. You. Yeah, you. Whatever your God is, whatever you put before God is the reason it's not raining. And that has something to say about us, right? I could stand up here self-righteously and say, well, I don't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. I believe in the one true God and Jesus Christ, His only begotten Son. But it's not raining like I wish it was. Come on down a little bit farther. This is where I really want to focus today. Verse 26. "Behold," Moses said, "I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, and a curse if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, and turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, and go after other gods which ye have not known." Blessings and curses. Go back to chapter 28. It goes into a little bit more detail back here. It says, "And it shall come to pass," in verse 1, "if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all these commandments which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, blessed shalt thou be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy ground, and the fruit of thy cattle, and the increase of thy kine, and the flocks of thy sheep. Blessed shall be the basket and thy store. Blessed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and blessed shalt thou be when thou goest out." Man, who doesn't want to be a part of that? We'll come down a little further to verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all His commandments and His statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city. Cursed shalt thou be in the field. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy land, and the increase of thy kine, and the flocks of thy sheep. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. What's the name of this camp meeting?
Time to choose.
A time to choose. Blessings or curses. Isn't that what Moses laid out before the people? Choose this day. Which shall you receive? You either serve the Lord your God and keep His commandments and all of His statutes and receive blessings, or fall away and receive curses. It's kind of a scary thought when you think about it. Come on down to verse 45. It says, Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. Because thou hast hearkened not to the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep His commandments and His statutes which He commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. So it's not just enough to serve the Lord thy God and keep His commandments, but you have to do it with joyfulness and gladness of heart. I know a lot of people who try to keep God's commandments and they don't do it very joyfully. You know, outside of Jesus, there's only one other person that I know of in the Scriptures that has no sin recorded against his life. Who's that? Daniel. And when you think about that and you look at the life of Daniel, and your thoughts of Daniel is that he was a righteous man, yes? From the time he was a young man, he was 18 years old. If you believe in the spirit of prophecy and you read the spirit of prophecy on his life, you will find that his parents were faithful in training him up. But let me ask you, did Daniel suffer under the blessings or the cursing? He certainly suffered under the cursings, didn't he? And of course we know when you look at the miracles and the manifestations that occurred in Daniel's life, you can also say he was a partaker of the blessings, yes? But how could Daniel, I mean, it's recorded for us that Daniel's parents were faithful and they raised him up according to the will of the Lord. And guess what happened? Daniel was taken into captivity. And God said you would be taken into captivity if you worship false gods. He was taken into captivity by association. And worse. Turn to Isaiah chapter 39. I'm going to start in verse 6. This is what Isaiah had to say to Hezekiah. He says, Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. Do you suppose that the pronouncement of this sentence was a blessing or a curse? Curse. Daniel was a partaker of this blessing, this curse. Look at the next verse. And of thy sons. And by the way, Daniel was a member of the family of royalty. How do you know that? Because he was placed in the upper echelons of Nebuchadnezzar's house. Because he was educated, and his education continued. He was royalty. Behold, the days come. And it says, in thy sons, in verse 7, that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. 18 years old. And Daniel suffered this fate. Blessings and curses. I could imagine Daniel going there and saying, "Why me? I have tried to follow you the best that I knew how. My parents taught me to fear you." He could have become bitter if he would have kept his eyes focused on the things that was happening around him. But Daniel never became bitter. Even though he was tested and tried to his very manhood, he never became bitter. He trusted God, and he knew that no matter what, he must have understood Paul's writings before Paul wrote them. All things work to what? To the good for them that love and serve the Lord. What was Daniel really suffering under? Was he suffering under the curse of God? Or was he suffering the consequences of the sins of his fathers and their fathers? He was suffering under the consequences, wasn't he? Yes, he was. He suffered under the consequences. Unto the third and fourth generation of them that love me, or that hate me. Man. You know, everyone in this room is suffering under the consequences of the sin of one man. As Brother David said yesterday, we're not suffering under the guilt of that man, but we are suffering under the consequences of that man. Everyone in this room is suffering under the consequences of the sins of your parents and the sins of your grandparents and beyond. That's the fact. Does that mean that God has cursed you? No. God allows the consequences of our lives to come forward. He does. And He doesn't intervene in between on those consequences. When God pronounced these curses, was He saying, if you do this, this is what I'm going to do to you? Or was He saying, as a result of what you have done, this is what's going to happen? It's a consequence of what's going to happen because of your sin. I mean, back when you look at what was told to Hezekiah, what did Hezekiah do? Well, he asked the Lord for a special blessing, and the Lord intervened in a mighty way, right? The Lord intervened in a mighty way. He turned back the circumstances that were of his death. And He turned that dial back a few degrees, right? And the Babylonians who watched the sun were so fascinated when they heard this, they came to see Hezekiah. And guess what Hezekiah did? He showed them all the riches that he had. And he never showed them or told them about the God who turned back the dial of the sun and saved his life. So God wasn't cursing Hezekiah. But as a result of those Babylonians coming and seeing all the gold, guess what they went back and told their leaders? And they came back and they took the gold when God's protection was withdrawn from Israel because of their sins. Blessings and cursing, suffering under the consequences of your own life. Turn with me to Daniel chapter 3. Now, you're all very familiar with this story. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they suffered the curse just like Daniel. They suffered the consequences just like Daniel. They were men in the king's court, suffered the same thing that Daniel did. Young men. But they associated with another good young man. I'm not sure why Daniel's not here, but it was good that they associated together, these four men, because they all loved and served the Lord. But it says here in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, it says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Come down to verse 16. We know what happened. I mean, I could read on. There were representatives from every province of Babylon that were there. That means representatives from every part of the then known world, right? Because Babylon ruled the world. And they were all told that when they heard the music, they were to bow down and worship the image. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't bow down. And you know what? Some men came and told the king, hey, these Jews didn't bow down. And the king didn't just say, they're going to die. He said, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to give you another chance. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer in this matter. Now this is very interesting the way this is phrased. Because if you go back and you read Daniel chapter 2, you'll see that when Daniel is standing in the presence of the king answering his demand for an explanation of his dream and an interpretation of his dream, that Daniel is very careful how he answers the king, right? But these men now, they say, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, their faith. And He will deliver us out of thy hand, O king, their faith. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. And man, Nebuchadnezzar popped his cork. Right? He was so angry. You know the story. Make the fire 10 times hotter. The men who threw them in were burned to death. Their ropes were burned off, and that's it. What seemed to be a curse, God turned into a blessing. And the representatives from all over the world that witnessed this went back home, and guess what they did? They spread the good news of the gospel of the Son of God who was in the fire. That's amazing. If you don't think that every one of those people went back to their home country and spread the word about what happened, blessings and cursings. You know, in reality, you have a choice today. Just like Moses said to the people, you have a choice today to receive either blessings or cursings. You have a choice to either suffer the consequences of your own life or to live under the consequences of someone else's life. What do I mean by that? Everything we do is freighted with consequences. Everything. To Eve, it seemed a small thing to disobey a God by tasting the forbidden fruit, to tempt her husband also to transgress. But her sin opened the floodgates of woe upon the world. Who can know in a moment of temptation the terrible consequences that will result from one wrong step? One wrong step. You know, Vid was up here talking about the understanding of a child with respect to playing with a toy. Some of you are adult in here. Some of you are aged adults, and you might think you've had lots of experience, you know a lot, but I'm going to tell you, you don't know anything compared to God, who knows all. So who do you think you are to run your own life? Are you all-knowing? Even if you want sometimes to take the right step, it might be the wrong step because what? You're not all-knowing, and there will be consequences, right? Every moment is freighted with eternal consequences. We are to stand as minutemen, ready to serve at a moment's notice. Eternal consequences. Listen to this. How significant. One vain word. One trifling laugh may balance a soul in the wrong direction. Wow. Don, think about that with respect to this little boy right here. As Vid was saying, trifling with sin. Terrible are the consequences of not having a constant connection with God. That's the real crux. If you want to run your life, God will allow you to do it. And you will suffer the consequences of your own life. But I'm not going to leave you there. I'm going to give you hope. There was a man who came to this earth. He was also the Son of God. And guess what he did? He took the consequences of your life upon him. So that you might be able to take the consequences of his life upon you. What do you think? You have a choice. Whose life do you want to live? Every single day you have a choice. And you can suffer either the blessings of being a partaker of the life of Christ or the curses of being a partaker of your own life. That's the reality. Even though many people in the Old Testament had limited understanding because Jesus had not come, they still had wonderful glimpses. Turn with me to 2 Samuel. Chapter 24. Second Samuel chapter 24 verse 10. David just numbers God's people. And it says, David's heart smote him after that he numbered the people. Verse 10. And David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that what I have done. And now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away my the iniquity of thy servant. For I have done very foolishly. For when David was up in the morning, the word of the Lord came unto prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go say to David, Thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things. Choose thee one of them, that I may do it unto thee. So Gad came to David and told him and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come upon thee in the land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies, while they pursue thee? or that there be 3 days pestilence in the land. Now advise and see what answer I shall return unto him that sent me. Pestilence. Your enemies chasing you, or famine in the land. Those were the choices. Guess which choice David took? David said to Gad, I am in a strait. Let us fall now into the hand of the Lord, for he is merciful and great, and let me not fall into the hand of men. Whatever you decide, Lord, I trust you. Isn't that what he said? He said, I don't have the wisdom to choose. You know what? If you've given me... Who gave him the 3 things to choose? God gave him 3 things to choose. And can you imagine? Which one are you going to choose? How many people are going to have the least amount of deaths? What's it going to be? He has no idea. He realizes that this is beyond him. And he's the king of Israel. And he says, it is better for me to fall into the hand of a merciful God than for me to fall into the hand of men. Now I'm going to ask you, there's nobody in this room that likes to fall into the hand of men because men are evil, right? What are you? I'm going to ask again, what are you? You are a man, you are mankind. You should be afraid of yourself. I'm serious. Think about your choices. Think about your life. Who in here really trusts themselves? Who wants to keep their life in their own hands? Think about it. It's a terrible thing, according to David, to fall into the hand of men. That's really what Adam and Eve did at the beginning, right? They said, I will not have this man rule over me, meaning God. I will not have God rule over me. I choose to rule my own life, and what a mess. God calls for men like Elijah, Nathan, John the Baptist. Men who will bear His message with faithfulness regardless of the consequences. Men who will speak the truth bravely, though it call for the sacrifice of all they have. Why is it that all of these people, after the day of Pentecost, who understood what it meant to be a partaker of Christ's life, they didn't care if it cost them their own life? They were willing to give everything, right? Everything that I had belonged to you. And everything that you had belonged to me. It didn't matter anymore. Their lives didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was what? Jesus Christ. They preached the gospel. As a result, what were the consequences? The consequences, they were maybe thrown in jail. And they sang. They preached the gospel and maybe they were stoned. Maybe they got up like Paul, or maybe they didn't. It didn't matter, because whose hands were they in? They were in God's hands. It didn't matter because they were in God's hands. If you place yourself in God's hands, it doesn't mean you may not suffer. Did Jesus suffer? Yes, He did. Is that okay to be a partaker of His life? Amen. Let's go to Galatians chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 9. Lenny read a little bit of this yesterday. So then, they which be of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the consequences of transgressing that law. Yes? Cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. But that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. And the law is not of faith, but the man that doeth them shall live in them. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. If you are new to these meetings, if you are new to some of the things that we're sharing, I'm going to highly recommend a little booklet that I love. And you can get it from Brother Howard or Brother David. It's called The Broken Curse. It shows in way more detail than I can right now that when this talks about the fact that Jesus took the curse, He took the consequences of your life. He did something for us that we cannot do for ourselves. Being isolated and separated from God, He chose to go back to God. He trusted God with his life, even though he couldn't see past where he was. He said, Lord, into thy hands I trust you with my life. Even though he was the Son of God, he couldn't see past where he was. But yet he said, Lord, I trust you. Are you willing to die so thoroughly and so completely? To trust your life. You know, we've always talked about the rules and obeying the rules. No more. Give your life to Jesus and trust that He will do with it according to His will and good pleasure. Yes? We all need to understand what it really means to stop taking control of our own lives. That's what it means to fall into the hand of a man. You goof it up. I know I have. Every time I don't keep my eye fixed on Christ, I have a tendency to take back my own life. I hate my life. But I love the life of Jesus. I love it. Peace and rest. I don't care anymore about money. I don't care. And sometimes I drive my wife crazy because I say, I don't care. It doesn't matter. That's the truth. We, brothers and sisters, and by the way, I trust God that He's going to do with you according to His will and good pleasure. He's going to mold you. He's going to fashion you. He may bring you through the furnace, the fiery furnace of affliction, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because it will be for your own good. Do you trust Him? We need to start trusting Him in the little things, so that when the time comes, He can take us and use us for the grand things that He plans to do. Because He plans on using you for some grand things. Let me tell you something. I love the story of Elijah. Probably because sometimes my hard personality, he's kind of is in there, right? Calling fire down from heaven to destroy all the Babylon. Sometimes I get so indignant. Sometimes I get so indignant about things that are happening in the denomination that I came out of. I can't stand to see what's happening, right? I can't stand it. But you know what? I'm no different without Christ. No different. But you know, there was a young man who followed Elijah. He was called by Elijah. His name was Elijah, right? And he followed him. And he saw it. He witnessed all these things. Calling fire down from heaven. Right? And it's time for Elijah to go. You all know the story, right? Who in here would not like to have the spirit and power of Elijah? Right? Well, that wasn't good enough for Elijah. He's asked the question, what would you have me do for you? And he says, I want a double measure of what you got. He witnessed the life of Elijah and he says, I want a double measure. And you know what? Elijah says, if you see me go away, your prayer is answered. And he witnesses it and he lets his mantle go. And I don't believe that Elijah had a dream or a vision. I don't believe that God told him to smite the Jordan. You know why? Because of what he said, right? He smote the Jordan and he said, where is the God of Elijah? And what happened? It parted. But he knew before he ever smote that Jordan, he wasn't wasting his time because he saw Elijah go. Right? Well, let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. God is waiting to give us a double portion of what happened on Pentecost. You know that? I am not satisfied with having the spirit of Elijah anymore. I am not interested in a double portion of Elijah. I want the fullness of the stature of the measure of Jesus Christ. I want His life. I really do. No matter what that means. We are living in the end of time. The close of probation and the second coming of Jesus are at hand, even at the doors. And if you've been listening to the messages as of recent, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, yes? As it was in the days of Noah and Lot. We're going to go through some difficult circumstances, but this is what's going to happen to God's people. I love reading this. This is from Great Controversy. In every generation, God has sent His servants to rebuke sin, both in the world and in the church. But the people desire smooth things spoken to them, and the pure, unvarnished truth is not acceptable. Many reformers, in entering upon their work, determined to exercise great prudence in attacking the sins of the church and the nation. They hope that by example of a pure Christian life to lead the people back to the doctrines of the Bible. But the Spirit of God came upon them as it came upon Elijah, moving him to rebuke the sins of the wicked king and the apostate people. They could not refrain from preaching the plain utterances of the Bible. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the consequences. Ask the Lord for His Spirit and do whatever it is He wants you to do, leaving the consequences with God. They were impelled to zealously declare the truth and the danger which threatened souls. The words which the Lord gave them, they uttered fearless of the consequences, and the people were compelled to hear the warning. Soon. Very soon. In this time of persecution, as a result of this preaching, the faith of the Lord's servants will be tried. They have faithfully given the warning, looking to God and to His Word alone. God's Spirit moving upon their hearts has constrained them to speak. Stimulated with holy zeal. That means stimulated with Jesus. And with divine impulse strong upon them, they entered upon the performance of their duty without coldly calculating the consequences of speaking to the people the word which the Lord had given them. It doesn't matter. If God gives you something to speak, speak it. And leave the consequences with God. The work which they had undertaken seems far beyond their ability to accomplish. Brothers and sisters, we need to warn the whole world. Seem a little overwhelming? The enthusiasm which animated them is gone, yet they cannot turn back. Then, feeling their utter helplessness, they flee to the Mighty One for strength. They remember that the words which they have spoken are not their words, but His who bade them give the warning. God put the truth into their hearts, and they could not but forbear to proclaim it. Every new truth, listen to this. Every new truth has made its way against hatred and opposition. Brothers and sisters, the message that is going to light the world, right, is the message of Christ and His righteousness. Why on earth would anybody hate such a beautiful message? It's because they don't want to give up their life. If you are not willing to give up your life, you will despise Christ just like anybody else. That's a fact. Laying before you today blessings and cursings, really what I'm laying before you, is it going to be your life or is it going to be Christ's? The Lord gives a special truth for the people, His people in an emergency. Who dare to refuse to publish it? He commands His servant to present the last invitation of mercy to the world. They cannot remain silent except at the peril of their own souls. Christ's ambassadors have nothing to do with consequences. They must perform their duty and leave the results with God. Isn't that beautiful? I don't matter anymore. I'm going to close by taking you back to Deuteronomy again. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 30. Glimpses there was in the Old Testament. Indeed, there were glimpses. First, I'm going to read verses 1, 2, and 3. Deuteronomy chapter 30. And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessings and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God has driven thee. Brothers and sisters, the Lord wants to draw us back. He wants to call us all out, doesn't He? And shall return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey His voice according to all I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thy heart and with all thy soul. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity, have compassion on thee, and will return and gather thee from all nations, whither the Lord thy God has scattered thee. Come down to verse 6. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thy heart, and the heart of thy children. I like that. to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. This is a prophecy, brothers and sisters, is it not? This is a prophecy of our time. When God is going to call His people in from all the nations. This is a prophetic statement of our time. And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies, and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. And thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord, and do all His commandments which I command thee this day. The Lord thy God will make thee plenteous in every work of thy hand, and in the fruit of thy body. Come on down to verse 19. I'm closing with this. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life, Christ, and death, your life. Blessings and cursings. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. Please. That thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey His voice, and that thou mayest cleave unto Him. And I'm going to stop right here. For He is thy life. Thank God for Jesus Christ. Amen. Let's pray.